some of the concepts, some of the ideas, and then we're going to analyze messages and lessons for life. Particularly, we're going to talk about the cities of refuge that I mentioned in the Parsha, and a nice message that we could all learn from it about advice in our life. Because as they say, advice is the only commodity with more in supply than demand. So here's just a quick recap. The Parsha begins, Moshe is giving us the laws about annulment of vows and various other laws. And then we talk about, we go straight into the war that's waged against Midian. Maybe we could talk about that tomorrow, because that's fascinating in the teachings of Chassidus. I have a favorite Chassidic discourse that talks about this, and it discusses the idea of the war against strife and contention that unfortunately oftentimes the faribbles that overwhelm us. And it's an important discussion. It's important to look at that and to understand how we could try to avoid these faribbles, these difficult contentions that we oftentimes have in our lives. So this war of Midian, because they were plotting the moral destruction of the Jewish people, as we read last week about the promiscuity that they throng upon us. And so the Torah gives a detailed account of the war, of the spoils, how it was allocated amongst the people, the warriors, everything that was related to that war. But again, when the Torah talks about a war, we can't just see it as a historical event, but rather we have to know the relevance, the message, the lesson it has for us, that we also need to wage a battle against that strife and contention that exists in our own lives. And then we have the interesting story of the tribes of Reuven and Gad and half of Manasseh, that they asked for lands on the east of the Jordan as their portion of the promised land. And of course, the reason they wanted that is because they saw it as prime pasture land for their cattle. Now, at first, Moshe is upset with them. He says, the whole nation is going to fight to conquer the land, and you guys decide you don't even want to settle on the land. You found your nice, comfortable place here on the side. But eventually, Moshe relents when they say, no, we're going to come along, and we're going to fight, and we're going to do everything. Only then will we settle. And they explain that this place is good for their animals to pasture and for the children to play. And that's where Moshe teaches a profound lesson that we all have to know. When Moshe responds, he puts the children before their cattle, before their business. And again, that I think is important for all of us to keep in mind. Yes, it's nice to have a good place for our business to prosper and to succeed. But remember what's number one. Everything I'm doing, am I doing it? I could always tell my kids I'm doing it for their sake, and that's why I'm out, and that's why I'm not available, and remember what the priority is, because it's our children. And regardless what age and stage we're holding in life, our children has to be our number one priority. Fast forwarding the second portion through Maseh, we discussed yesterday the 42 journeys, and that the Torah calls them journeys, not encampments, because in life we're constantly moving. We have to be constantly on the go. We have to realize as well that where we are, it's part of our divine providence. There's a reason, there's a purpose why we are where we are. And so we have the Parsha also mentions the boundaries of Eretz Yisrael. Very, very important lessons and messages about the significance of Israel to us. And what we're going to discuss today is at the very end of the Parsha, where it discusses the Arei Miklat, the cities of refuge, which we can talk about later on as well, because they're mentioned in the book of Devarim too. And I usually like to mention them when we get closer to Rosh Hashanah, but Rosh Hashanah is not so far away. 8 weeks to Rosh Hashanah, my friends. So that itself is an important discussion too, because the cities of refuge obviously are refuge in space, but there's also a refuge in time. And the refuge in time could be Shabbos. It could be the month of Elul when we're getting ready for Rosh Hashanah. That's the Baal Shem Tov taught. But I think at the moment, if you are in quarantine, that is also a city of refuge. And you have to see it as an opportunity. If we are quarantined, if we're isolated in a particular space, how are we maximizing our potential, what we're doing in that space with our time there? And the very end of the parsha talks about the daughters of Tzlafchad, which we mentioned in last week's parsha as well. They married within their own tribe, the tribe of Menashe, so that the estate that they inherit from their father should not pass on to the province of another tribe. And that's pretty much the parsha in a wrap. Now, let's look at something else. We're going to look at the need for direction in life. And that we're going to see from the story of from the story of the cities of refuge. Now, the basic idea is, it's something I've taken from Dale Carnegie. Dale Carnegie talks about how to convey practical advice. So as friends, we're often quick to let others know what they are missing. We see somebody is missing something, we like to tell them. All too often, it happens that we offer that unsolicited advice. It happens, right? It's the only commodity with more in supply than demand. Other times, perhaps we have good intentions when we are just coughing up advice, and people don't listen. And then we get frustrated. Why don't you listen? I know what's going on, right? So if we take the extra effort and dealing with the how, the when, and the where of how to achieve the goal, then it's possible that we could give advice that makes a tangible difference. So think about it. We all have the ability to, it's so easy to discern the shortcomings of others. For some reason, it's always glaring. And it's not always because of the heightened cynicism or being overly judgmental, but it could also be attributed to our objective vantage point when we see things from another angle that perhaps the other person doesn't see things from. But when we do point out a personality trait or a bad habit that perhaps needs to be corrected, it's not something people like to accept. Dale Carnegie teaches us the C's that people dislike. Don't condemn, criticize, or complain, because those are things that people just don't enjoy. So what I thought we should discuss here today, I mean, it's fairly obvious, but it's easily taken for granted. And that is, there are many ideas which remain in the realm of theory, okay? And the thing is, if we could discuss them through dialogue and through and conversation, then these ideas are brought to the fore, and we could realize that, you know, if we could articulate our messages and talking about things in a more meaningful way, in a way that, as our sages tell us, dvarim hayotzim min halev, words that come from the heart, nichnasim al halev, will penetrate, will enter the heart. And so if we could convey and articulate our messages in a meaningful way, then they would actually be accepted. The Baal Shem Tov says oftentimes when we see a fault in others, we have to know that it's a reflection of something inside of ourselves. So let's get straight into it. We said we're going to touch on the cities of refuge. So let's go. In our parsha, we are introduced to the mitzvah of establishing the Arei Miklat. Arei Miklat are cities of refuge. So let me put it over here in the text of the parsha. It says the verse, Vayidaber Hashem el Moshe lemar. Hashem spoke to Moshe saying, what does he say? Daber b'nei Yisrael v'mataleim ki atem oivim es Yarden artza Canaan. Speak to the children of Israel and say to them, when you cross the Jordan to the land of Canaan, Vihi krisem lachem orim. You should designate cities for yourselves. Orei miklat tiyana lachem. They should be cities of refuge for you. Benas shamar etzeach make nefesh b'shgaga. We're just going to read the verse. We'll analyze and discuss it. This is the place where a person who unintentionally and inadvertently killed somebody else should flee there. What does it mean, someone who inadvertently killed? We'll get to that in a moment. Okay, there's a typical example. We'll analyze it in a second. The verse concludes, these cities should serve you as refuge from an avenger. What would be an avenger? Well, these days we see it's very frequent, very common, where people have agendas and they want to get equal and they want all their rights recognized and acknowledged. So that's what the verse is talking about. And it says, so that the murderer should not die until when? Until he stands in judgment before the congregation, until he is judged, until he stands trial. So what it's telling us very clearly is that we can't just have people avenging the blood of others. So who would be this avenger that would want to kill this? Remember, we're not talking about a murderer. We're talking about an inadvertent killing. You know what happens? God forbid, that's why it's called a car accident. It's called an accident because it was a mistake. It was an accident. That's why the incident is. We're not talking here about an intentional murder. But of course, as we study always, we have to look at Rashi. So Rashi translates these words, Migoyel. Who is the avenger? Mipnei goyel hadam shukarav lanirtzach. We're talking about a family member, a kinsman of the murdered victim. So sadly, we think of an instance here. And of course, any person who wants to claim innocence might say it was inadvertent, it wasn't intention, it was by mistake. So the Gemara discusses this. This is a matter that the courts have to determine. Okay, this is something that it's not for the public opinion necessarily. There has to be cross-examination and interrogations and everything that's necessary to determine how we know if this was intentional or an inadvertent killing. But the point is, the Torah is telling us that a murderer who shed blood unintentionally is given the opportunity to flee to a designated city of refuge called Ari Miklat, and that's where he could seek asylum. And until he reaches the city of refuge, he's a fair target, because we understand why the family is upset with this guy and wants to exact retribution, want to take revenge. And if they do so, then they're able to kill him, technically speaking, without any legal repercussions. However, once this person reaches the Arei Miklat, the city of refuge, then they're protected from the pursuers. And in this place, in the Arei Miklat, they cannot be touched by any family members who are seeking justice. So again, it seems like a very straightforward reading of the Torah portion this week, but obviously obviously makes it clear that the purpose of the city of refuge wasn't a punishment, but it was an opportunity of asylum. It was an opportunity to protect the murderer. Okay, unintentional murderer, but still. Now, there's a book called the Sefer HaChinuch. The Sefer HaChinuch is a fascinating work. We're not exactly sure who its author was, but I've mentioned him and brought up his teachings in many of our classes because he gives an explanation for each of the mitzvahs. In fact, he gives 4 ideas for each mitzvah, 4 aspects of every mitzvah he discusses. So he talks first of all about the definition of the mitzvah. Then he discusses the ethical lessons that we could glean, that could be deduced from the mitzvah. Then he analyzes the basic laws that are relevant, that pertain to the observance of any particular mitzvah, 613 mitzvahs. Every mitzvah, obviously some have much more detail than others. And finally discusses who is obligated to perform the mitzvah and when. So that's, the story goes that it was, the author, he just wrote his name as the Levite of Barcelona. He hasn't said who he is. Some say it's Rabbi Aaron Alevi of Barcelona, a very famous commentator. Others say, we don't know for certain. For whatever reason, he didn't give his name. But he wrote, the purpose of the book was to give his child time to study on Shabbos afternoons and to explain the mitzvahs from these 4 angles. So here's what he says about this mitzvah. He says, Sharish mitzvah zu yadua ubara. The reason for this mitzvah of the city of refuge is readily apparent. So that the inadvertent slayer does not get killed by the redeemer of the blood. We understand that the family is upset that this person killed their relative. We understand. And therefore, God provides a refuge, an asylum, a place for this person to seek shelter until justice is determined. So, although it seems straightforward, but there are some questions we need to ask. First of all, what would the law be if there was no need to flee from the avenger? What would the law be in this case? Think where the deceased left no relatives, right? So now, lucky guy, he by mistake killed somebody, but that person has no relatives. Does he still have to go to the city of refuge? And how about if the guilty party isn't afraid of the relatives? He's a strong guy. He says, I'm willing to take my chances. I'll stay right here at home and let them come mess with me. I'll tell them. Does he still have to go to the city of refuge? So the point the question I'm asking is an accidental killer obligated to head to the city of refuge? Or is it just an opportunity for him to save his life, right? Is there perhaps something maybe even deeper at play going on? Obviously, everything we learn in Torah has a deeper message. So we have to try to understand what is the idea behind the city of refuge. And the basic answer to our question is actually, no, the perpetrator does not have the option at all to forego his rights of going to the Arei Miklat. He has to go to the city of refuge, regardless of whether the next of kin is a threat to him. Maybe there is family, maybe there's friends, maybe he's resolved it with them and negotiated, discussed. Maybe there are no relatives, it doesn't matter, he still has to go. And the reason is because the verdict for him to go to the Arei Miklat is not just a chance for asylum to protect him from the avengers, but it's also sort of a punishment for his actions. Now you might think, but it was a mistake. It's true, it's a mistake, but maybe we have to be more cognizant and aware of what we're doing in life. So here's something the Chinuch says. I want to continue with his point. Our question is going to the city of refuge necessary without a threat to life? And here's what the Sefer Chinuch explains. Kievman Shabbos takala gedola kazu. In as much as this great tragedy took place, you might think even if it's a mistake, the fact of the matter is, this person committed this mistake. God forbid, he was on his phone texting, and bam, that person walked in the middle of the street. God forbid, you think of any instance of where it was a mistake, it was an accident. One of my most tragic Hatzalah calls, but it's already been almost 2 years that I recall being present at, where I came to the scene and it was evident that one or more than one person was crushed in the second vehicle. And I'm attending to the fellow who was completely untouched in the one vehicle. And this guy, while chatting with him there, it was very sad when he realized that he was begging and pleading, please bring the person back to life. In this instance, he drank a little bit too much and his eyesight was blurry. He was driving under the influence of alcohol. And sadly, as a mistake as that was, and I don't know if I should call that a mistake. Maybe that's not a mistake, because every person should be responsible for the amount of l'chaims they drink. You want to drink l'chaim in shul? Gesundheit. We had it, but make sure you're not driving, you're not operating a motor vehicle. We had a guest in our house for Shabbos a number of times. His name is Harry Sideropoulos. You may have heard him. He's a very famous comedian here in Joburg. So Harry said to me, he never understood why we Jews can't drive on Shabbos or can't use electricity. He said the driving part, by now he's figured out after coming to a couple of Shabbos meals. After all those l'chaims, he knows why we can't drive. It's the responsible thing to do. So if a person does that, they are mistake or not mistake. I'm using that as a contemporary example. But the point is, even if it's a mistake, were you the one who sadly is responsible for this mistake? You have to do something about it. And therefore, the Chinuch says that the person has to suffer the pain of exile, which is considered a mild form of death, that loneliness, that isolation, whereby the individual is separated from his loved ones, from his birthplace, he must dwell all his days among strangers. He's sent off to exile. Now, living in the city of refuge wasn't just a simple matter of relocating. Okay, no more Joburg going off to the Karoo. It was leaving one's familiarity, everything, leaving your home, your hometown. It's moving to a foreign place. Essentially, the individual was exiled to the city indefinitely. He would be there until the Kohen Gadol died, whether the active one in service or retired Kohen Gadol passed away, then he was able to leave there. Or if there was a verdict from the court based on a hearing for him. So the point is, the need to be exiled was one where it wasn't just a safe haven for him. And it was some kind of a punishment, but it was more than just restitution, where the killer paid his debt to society. The Torah's perspective, the Torah is obviously compassionate. In Eishes Chayil, what do we sing on Friday nights? The Torahs were called as a Torah of kindness. So the Torah's compassion is even within the punishments of Torah, there's compassion. So on a basic level, we could view punishments not as simple vengeance against this unintentional murderer, the perpetrator of this incident, but rather as a pathway for atonement. It's a necessary stage of purging the sin, the evil, allowing forgiveness to be attained, that this person saying, I take responsibility, I acknowledge that I did something, I shouldn't have been looking at the texts on my phone, or I shouldn't have been drinking before. I know that I'm responsible. And from a Torah's perspective, we don't punish just for the sake of punishment. So let me share that with you in the teachings of the Rebbe. He says as follows: as is well known regarding punishments in Torah, their purpose is not, God forbid, to punish. Rather, they deny and define and refine the individual until the sin is atoned for. Therefore, the entire Torah, including the punishment, is called a Torah of kindness. So everything in Torah is considered kindness, and including this city of refuge. So being banished to exile, which seems like a person's being punished, this idea of being isolated and quarantined from society, was there to bring about, it was a means of atonement. And the Talmud discusses this. And the Talmud shows us something interesting, that false witnesses, a person who testified falsely, also has to go to the city of refuge. Why? Because there they could find the opportunity of atonement. And this is what the Gemara says. And the Talmud makes a very similar point in addressing the distinction between someone who's already spent time in the city of refuge versus someone who had not yet reached the city before the Kohen Gadol passes away. And the Talmud suggests that even though the Kohen Gadol, the high priest, already died, and therefore the person has, so to say, a ticket out of the city of refuge, perhaps this person who's on the way to the city of refuge, while the Kohen Gadol died, maybe this person should still go there. And why? For what reason? Don't you think he's exempt? And the Gemara says no. Because, of course, there's still a benefit. He or she has to learn, has to achieve atonement. Let's read it in the words of the Gemara. If after the unintentional murderer's verdict was decided and he was sentenced to exile, the high priest died. Now we know the law is he's not exiled. What's the reason? Says the Gemara. Abaya says it was a kal v'chomer. If one who was already exiled now emerges with the death of the high priest, with regard to one who is not yet exiled, is it not right that he should not be exiled? The Talmud rejects this reasoning. And perhaps with regard to this one, who was already exiled, his sin was atoned for by the exile, and therefore the death of the high priest facilitates his return. But that one who was not yet exiled, no, his sin was not atoned for. The death of the high priest should not prevent this exile. Talmud rebuts. Is it his exile that atones for his sin? It is the death of the high priest that atones for his sin. And the high priest died. So what's the whole point? What's going on here in the Talmud at this discussion? The Talmud understands that sending a person to the Arei Miklat, to the city of refuge, was not just a punishment, but rather it was also an atonement. And Chassidus explains and analyzes this idea, the process of teshuvah. It's called tikkun. You're all familiar with tikkun olam, fixing the world, right? Tikkun means to fix, to repair. In other words, atonement is achieved how? By repairing that which was blemished, that which was broken. So if I did something, if I was what's the word for it? I behaved. Don't you love it when? What's the term where a person just behaves haphazardly, without attention, without focus, and therefore it, God forbid, resulted in this incident. So the emphasis is, the point is that I have to focus. I have to fix my lack of responsibility. Okay, it's recognizing that I wasn't in the right state of mind. I wasn't paying attention, and I have to work on purging that irresponsibility within me. The tikkun is, how am I going to fix, to make amends, to rectify, to repair that which was broken? Our actions, we have to know, always have an impact, either on a personal level or on a communal level, and ultimately on the world around us. So spiritually speaking, the world is in an ongoing process of development, and every time I do a mitzvah, I am rectifying the world around me. But when I do the opposite of a mitzvah, what am I doing? It is breaking. I'm contributing to the brokenness of the world. And that has an adverse effect on the stability of society, the growth of mankind. So what's the whole idea of teshuvah? It's a process called tikkun. I'm going to rectify, I'm going to fix up, I'm going to repair that which I broke, the damage that I did. Now, certain damages are much harder to repair. A murder, even if it was unintentional, I've taken a soul out of this world. It's a much harder damage for a person to repair. So says the Rebbe in this letter that he's written to someone, I will comment regarding what you wrote about the purpose and meaning of punishment in Torah in light of what is explained in Hasidic thought. The very purpose of punishment is to repair the damage that came about through the sin. To think about just what purposeful punishment is in our own lives as well, when, perhaps we're trying to discipline our children. You ever gave thought what the word discipline itself means? Discipline it's related to the word disciple, like student. What does a teacher do to a student? He has to teach. So the whole purpose of discipline is to teach the child. And the purpose of punishment in Torah is exactly the same. It's to teach. The idea is, how am I going to teach? How am I going to make a difference? What's the lesson? So punishment is not there to hurt a person. The purpose of the Torah is punishment, just like as a parents, we're trying to discipline our children. The Torah is how Almighty God, our Father in heaven, with kindness and compassion, wants to teach us a lesson in life. And that is to make amends to the spiritual damage that we caused. It's perhaps to restore that sensitivity in humanity that was lost through the behavior that the person did, and requires now that rectification, that tikkun. That's the idea of tikkun olam, why we're all responsible, because all of humanity has played a role in the downgrade of the world and in the world's problems. So we all have to play our role in tikkun olam, in fixing the world. So part of this process is understanding that the punishment is not there to hurt the person. It's not to make the person a pariah. You go off to Arei Miklat. What a terrible person you are. In fact, There were clearly marked signs showing people how to get to Arei Miklat, so nobody should look at them negatively. Conversely, to go to Jerusalem, there were no clearly marked signs because you wanted to ask people, you wanted to cultivate that spirit of everyone going to Jerusalem, to celebrate, to go to the temple, to achieve the purpose that was gained by going to the Beis HaMikdash. But to Arei Miklat, we don't want to embarrass people. So every person, we understand, has their unique mission, their purpose, why they're here in this world. As we discussed yesterday, wherever we are is for our unique purpose. We have a specific divine mission to fulfill, something special that only we can do. No one else could do what you're meant to do. That's why, as the Talmud says, not even a blade of grass, every single one has its own DNA. If we all have our own unique fingerprint. It's up to each one of us to utilize every single moment that we're awake in this world to pursue, to fulfill our unique mission. We are indispensable to God's plan for this world. We have to know that. And so when a person is punished for a crime, especially as egregious, as terrible as accidentally killing somebody, now, what do you think that person, you start thinking, oh my gosh, what have I done? I can't believe I did this. I'm going to be put away for the rest of my life. You can imagine what the person's feeling and thinking. And all of a sudden, all their ambition, their purpose, their drive, their mission for in this world, they think is completely finished. The rest of my life, I'm going to rot away in this prison. By the way, prison itself is something you don't even see in Torah. So now the person thinks that they're done. Their mission in this world is finished. They have nothing else to achieve, to accomplish. They're going to rot away the rest of their life. And we can understand why a person might feel that way. But that's not the Jewish way. That's not what the Torah is trying to achieve with Arei Miklat. And here's the thing, as the Chinuch says, the idea of punishment is not to hurt the person, but rather to help them to repair, to do their tikkun, their teshuvah. And so we understand that there's a higher purpose. That in fact, in the Arei Miklat, this person could still be active members of society and fully responsible to realize their goals on earth, why they're here, that they'll have what to fulfill. So in this particular instance, where we're talking about one of the most heinous, egregious things a person could do, which is, God forbid, killing somebody unintentionally. We're not talking about a murderer. I mean, I'm clarifying that over and over because that's very important. A murderer, the Torah's punishment for them is capital punishment. But in this instance, we say that there is an opportunity of asylum, that this person could seek shelter in the Arei Miklat. And what are they going to do there? What's the purpose of it? Let me share with you the words, an insight from the Rabbi of what he says about this. Quotes the verse in our parsha, which it says, days have been formed, and one of them is his. Every person is allotted a limited amount of days by heavenly court to perform his purpose, his mission in this world. And every single moment of life must be utilized to fulfill that purpose and mission. Thus, it is a crime to punish a perpetrator with sitting in prison, thereby holding him back from fulfilling his mission in life. You don't find the punishment of prison in Torah because prison holds a person back from fulfilling their purpose. In any given situation, even if one has sinned and went astray, he retains the obligation to continue fulfilling his mission. And what do we know of God's secret plans? From this, it is evident that living in the city of refuge is not equivalent to being in prison and jail. Even while stuck in a situation that permits the next of kin to kill him, the perpetrator still retains the obligation to fulfill the purpose and mission, and therefore, we cannot imprison him and rob him of the opportunity to fulfill his life mission. Instead, we punish him with exile. He goes to a city of refuge, not to a institution, a building of confinement. In that city, he's free to do everything he would do anywhere else. Just, he's exiled in a different place. We punish him with exile, as the Chinuch writes, that he ought to suffer the pain of exile, that he is separated from his loved ones and from his birthplace, just like the family who no longer has their loved one who was killed by him. But at the same time, he must still do all that is necessary to fulfill his life mission in the same manner as a free person. To the extent that a student is exiled, his master is exiled with him. This means that although the student is not fitting still, the teacher is exiled with him in order that he will learn from his teacher as before. So I think we understand that, of course, the person always has to seek asylum, regardless of whether there's actually any threat to his life by anybody, any family members who are trying to revenge his blood, the blood of the person he killed. Because the city of refuge is not about asylum, but rather it's about the purpose of tikkun, of rectification that he could achieve in that city. Now later on, we're going to read in the book of Dvarim, where Moshe Rabbeinu repeats the instruction of the Arei Miklat, and he talks about when they come to Israel. But the point is, the reason he has to go there is because of tikkun, to rectify, to do his teshuvah. That's the reason he goes to the city of refuge. Now, let's read an interesting insight from, from the Sifri, which is a rabbinic commentary, the Medrash, where it says, from this that it is stated, let the Redeemer of blood lest the Redeemer of blood pursues the murderer. Says the Sifri, I only know when there's a pursuer and a redeemer, but a pursuer without a redeemer, or a redeemer without a pursuer, or one without a pursuer or a redeemer. What do I know? How did we know they have to go? So he says from the instance of the word rotseach, from the word rotseach. So he says from this word rotseach, we can conclude that the inadvertent murderer could only attain this teshuvah, their atonement. How? By going to the city of refuge and doing their tikkun, fixing that which they need to fix. So what we see is that this is a necessity to go to that city. It wasn't about the punishment per se, but it was about what the person could do in that city to fix themselves. And in fact, certain details in the laws of the city show exactly how much the Torah is concerned for this person. We talked about, for example, the directions of getting to the city, where it says that the perpetrator is not allowed to pack their bags or even to say goodbye to their family. As soon as they realized what they did, they committed the sin, they, God forbid, killed somebody, they have to drop everything and run. They have to just go. Go, the Torah uses the words to flee to the city. Just a second, ladies and gentlemen. And I'm going to share, okay?
Rabbi, what does Rotzeach mean, please?
Rotzeach literally means murderer.
Murderer.
So the Torah is saying that because he committed murder, that's why he has to go there. Irrelevant if anybody's going to take revenge. You might say, we're buddies. I know that the person I killed was a mistake. You could think it may have been at work. In fact, the typical example that's offered in the Torah is a work example. The sages say that as the two coworkers were working on chopping a tree. And by mistake, he dropped the axe or the wood fell down on his friend. They're coworkers. This is friendly fire. This was unintentional. Still, he has to go. And considering that maybe the family is good friends with him and forgives him and all of that, doesn't matter. He has to drop everything and go. Can't even pack his bags. And in order for him to get there, we described before how the Torah basically provides a fast track for him to arrive there safely. The Talmud says that as they directed for them a road from the city to that city, there were like special roads paved directly from city to I don't know exactly how it was, but within Israel, there were certain roads. This is the road to get to the city of refuge. and basically to make it easy for the person, and signs and instructions, so you never had to ask anybody and be embarrassed. Oh, excuse me, how do I get to the city of refuge? Oh, you're the one who killed that person. You know what? You were sparing him that embarrassment. The Ramban says the Jewish court is obligated to construct roads leading to the cities of refuge. They should be maintained and widened. Any stumbling block and obstacle should be removed. No potholes. This wasn't Joburg roads. On these roads, neither a hill, a valley, nor a river should be left. Instead, a bridge should be built across so as not to impede a person fleeing there. This is all implied by the verse that says you should prepare the road for yourselves. The width of this road to the city of refuge should not be less than 32 cubits. I'm going to have to do some quick calculation here. A cubit, an amma, is about half a meter. So 32 cubits is 16 meters wide. Are our roads 16 meters wide? That's a wide road, isn't it? 16 meters wide. And signs were clearly stated, refuge, refuge, telling people directly how to get there so the killers be aware of the way and turn there. So even if you got your Waze or Google Maps, the directions to the city had to be as clear and as accessible as possible, so he never had to embarrass himself asking people. There were clear signposts. Now, even when you're dealing with someone who has committed a gross negligence and has to face the consequences, the Torah is still giving us the opportunity for this person to fulfill, to get their tikkun done in the easiest way possible without embarrassment. What does that show us? I mean, this demonstrates God's care and compassion. As we said, Torah's chesed. This is a kindness that this person doesn't need to be embarrassed in any way. And that there's an opportunity to do teshuvah. We're providing them every way possible. That there's a clear path directing them right back on track. And I think this teaches us a very powerful and timely message. That is, in life, we often feel like we've wandered far off the beaten track. We sometimes feel lost. We sometimes feel that we don't know what we've done wrong, but we wonder, is it ever possible for me to make amends, to be a better human being, to be a better Jew, to be a better spouse or parent or child or whatever it might be that we need to fix up in our lives. We took that wrong turn. We did something wrong. And imagine how far off sometimes we feel we've gone off the track. Is there even a way out of there? Is there a way we could get back on track? And the answer, of course, is absolutely yes. There's a way back for everyone, every single person. And the Torah is telling us that God is constantly providing us options and opportunities that show us how to get home. We see here for the worst sin a person could have committed, taking away someone's life, and yet the Torah makes it so easy for them to get back on track. And so if we just look at our navigation apps on our phone, and if we make the wrong turn, what does Waze do? It tells us to make that U-turn. And if we go further off the road, it still keeps telling us, make U-turn, make U-turn. And if we pay attention, then we realize the same thing. God is giving us opportunities to get back on track. If we just have a little bit of focus, we could start to notice that rerouting from on high, that God is giving us opportunity to just get back on track. That's what we need to realize. The city of refuge was not a punishment. It was a gift for this person. And likewise, God gives us the opportunity as well. Let's read it in the words of the Rebbe as he says, God granted human beings with free will, including the ability to choose evil. God forbid, it's our choice. Everything we do is our choice. As such, everyone needs a little bit of help from above, that God should tell them, refuge here, go down this path that leads to goodness and life. No one can be completely confident that they are headed down the right path. And at times, we all must fall back on a little divine assistance for God to come in and tell us where we should go. So regardless of where everyone's holding, doesn't matter, each person, regardless of our lifestyle and our religious commitment, the point is we all have that, or we all need a little bit of help. and God is there to assist us. Whether we need to get on track or we're already on the right track, we could always use a little bit of assistance. The city of refuge was created. That means there were many rotzchim. Actually, even if one, the Torah says the rotzeach, even if one, and the truth is, the reality is there could have been many. But regardless whether it was many or one, we still built that city of refuge to help even the one individual who needed it. In Tanya, the Alter Rebbe says as follows in chapter 13. It says the final verdict comes from the arbitrator. Who? Hashem, who comes to the aid of the good nature. As our sages said, if the Almighty did not help him, he cannot overcome his evil inclination. The help comes by means of the glow radiated by the divine light, which illuminates the divine soul so that it may gain the upper hand and mystery over the folly of the fool and evil nature. So I think, in short, the good news is that divine help is always available at all times. And yes, there are apps and ways to make that happen in our lives. And the point, of course, is that one of the best ways we could help ourselves is actually by helping others. And
Rabbi,
this is where...
Rabbi, can I shoot a question? Yeah, Ben.
Please, yeah.
If exile is punishment with compassion,
Yeah.
how in all this do you classify cherem? Because is that not really an exile as well? And how does that fit into this whole picture?
Okay. Very good question. Benzi's asking about cherem, which is excommunication. Excommunication is a means that it's a tool, a means that can be used by the Beis Din, even still today. And that is that if a person is disobeying the verdict, the rules set forth by the Beis Din, it's a tool the Beis Din has. Now, it's not a tool that is enforceable by the law, although sometimes the law, I think, would accept it as well. But the idea simply is, I remember an instance that it was used recently where a man was refusing to give his wife a get, and the Beis Din employed the cherem, where they said nobody should include this man in a minyan. Now imagine how that feels, not to be allowed to be included in a minyan, or nobody should conduct business with him. People should ignore him. In fact, we had such a guy visit our shul last year before Corona. It wasn't pleasant. He actually, there were messages going around town saying that this particular person is on cherem from the Beis Din because he hasn't given his wife a get. He called me up before Shabbos. I didn't know it's him. He used an alias, a different name. And then when he came to shul, I didn't know exactly what I was supposed to do. I told our CSO guys, and they sent him out. The Beis Din sent a message. This man is not to be welcomed in our shuls. Now, the Rambam talks about the idea that this man, is it incompassionate that we excommunicate him, that we say he can't come to the shul, that he can't be part of it? So Rambam gives a very simple answer. Rambam says the person, his neshama, his soul, really wants to do the right thing. But sadly, the spirit of folly has gotten into him. And therefore, unfortunately, he's behaving in this incorrect way. And if he just came to his senses, he would realize how he has to behave. So it's not something that's lightly done by the Beis Din. It's something that is done when necessary, if necessary. And the Beis Din doesn't in those instances. So cherem is a little bit different. But again, I think it's the same principle. But cherem was not sending a person off to another place. They just weren't welcomed within their society, within their community, into the minyan or into business or into other things. He's not welcomed in our homes until he rectifies, until he fixes what he was meant to fix. Okay.
Can I ask,
Sure.
was there a time where there were more than one in a city of refuge? Could two people go at the same time, or did they have to be isolated?
No. There could be more than one person there. It wasn't limited to one person per se. There could be more than one person for sure.
They still had company in the city of refuge?
Yeah, in fact, these were cities that had that I think they were Levite cities.
Mm-hmm.
So they were living amongst regular society, just
and they were
their community. These were real cities. These weren't just murderers in the city. So chances
And
are you had no clue if the person next to you was a murderer or just a regular resident of the city.
And
You
think
didn't know.
there were righteous people were so that they could learn from the righteous people how to.
100%, absolutely. The idea was that they should learn from the people there, and certainly it wasn't. There was a heightened security in that city, so the relatives couldn't come to exact retribution. But it was a normal city. It wasn't like a jail cell where they were incarcerated and separated completely from society. No. They were part of society while they were there. Okay.
Thank
All
you.
right. So the message now, of course, that we need to get to and understand is the concept, the idea that about advice. That, it feels good to when we see somebody making positive strides and becoming and improving their life, especially if it's based on a tip that you gave them. You advise them, okay? So, of course, while the business of giving advice, the Torah is telling us not to purposely lead anyone down the wrong path. In fact, let me share with you this verse, which we're all familiar with, which is Livnei Ivar Le'site Michshol, that before a blind person, not to put any stumbling blocks, right? So we know very clearly that we're not allowed to mislead anybody. What does it mean before a blind person not to put a stumbling block? Don't give advice to somebody that's wrong, okay? Where you're misleading them. But the point that we're saying here is that the Torah gives us the opportunity to make amends, but every single one of us, and I say this at funerals, I haven't heard any other rabbis sharing this piece, but we read Psalm 91 of Tehillim, Yoshev B'Seis Elyon, which tells us that true comfort, true solace comes from Hashem himself. But I think it's a reminder to us too, that we're created in the divine image. And especially these days when people are mourning without the comfort and support that they used to get in a Shiva home, we have to realize that we should be their comfort and support in whatever way possible. We're created in the divine image. We should be there for others. So of course, when we're on the receiving end of advice, we have to keep our eyes wide open. We have to know, is whatever suggestions coming our way, is it right? Advice is the only commodity with more in supply than demand. Is it an appropriate tip or is it misguided? But the same thing is, regardless who's offering up the suggestion, the Talmud says, Kabel es ha'emes mimishamer. We should take the truth from wherever it comes. When it comes to giving advice, we also have to take into consideration, how much do I empathize with the person that I'm counseling? Of course, it's our duty to offer insights, to assist somebody, to be there for another person, whatever way possible. We should, but we should also consider how we're giving that advice and how effective the advice will be. So before we just dish out our pearls of wisdom, that we all have such wonderful ideas that we love to share, perhaps we have to pause and reflect and put ourselves in the other person's shoes. We have to think about that person's dilemma, the question they have. Maybe we should empathize with them. And then we could give quality advice. So the secret to giving good advice, it's not so much in the advice itself, but rather in how well it will be accepted by the other person. There's one of my favorite expressions is, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. Very important. So, all things considered, empathy is still not enough. And sure, it may connect you with another person, and that's important. And as the Rebbe would say, words that come from the heart will enter the heart. They have to know that it comes from your heart. If you truly want to make a difference in someone else's life, then it's not just about dishing out advice. We have to think about how we're making that advice, that it's practical, that it helps the person. Think about where is it going to lead them. And I think the where, the when, the who, the how, that all could go a very long way. Right? For example, with all this lockdown and, we need to lose, some of us need to lose a little bit of weight. So it's very nice when people tell me, do this, that, or the other. But if you tell somebody, there's a gym down the block, and you give them very specific advice, maybe you tell them, here, I know of a particular personal trainer, and you give them more specific advice, then it's much more likely that that person is going to listen to the advice that's given to them. You could even, better yet, make it, you want to make it more realistic. You offer the person, let's go together. Okay, you tell them, let's go 6 o'clock in the morning, when it's whatever. You make up a practical plan where you tell them when it's a good time to go, when it's quiet, so they'll have more space for themselves. You tell them there's a special, there's a sale going on. The point is you make it more realistic. And when we do that, when we make the advice more tangible, more practical for them to accept, then they're able to make it actionable in their life. So if you really want to make a difference, you think about what are the difficulties in the person in the advice that you're giving to that person. And think about it in every aspect of life. There are so many times we want to give advice to people, but somebody's lost. So if we put a little bit of effort and a little bit of creative thinking, we can add that spice to the advice that can make all the difference. In each person's life, the road leading to the city of refuge could be long, it could be arduous, it could be difficult. And how are we going to make it easier for them? The least we could do is to be at the person's side and be their signpost and help them. We could pave those little signs along the way that make it easier for them to reach their city of refuge. And that, I think, is so important. And God reciprocates in kind and treats us in the same way. When we're there to help others, God brings us help in our lives. God gives us the opportunity for ourselves as well to find the solace, the comfort that we need in our difficult times. When we help others, we ourselves are helped. Let me tell you, while I was in quarantine for the past week or so, I came to the realization, I did a lot more of the Hatzalah calls that I'm involved with as a Hatzalah volunteer. And I was able to be there for others while I myself was being helped. And I think that's something that certainly helped me tremendously, that while I'm being helped, to help others. Because the best way you can help yourself is to help others. So the point, of course, is that thank God most of us are not in the category of the inadvertent murderer, God forbid. But we all have areas in our life that we could use some repair. Who doesn't have an aspect, an area in life that could be repaired, whether it's materially or spiritually? Life is challenging. And we don't all always have a perfect score in life. We all have our struggles and challenges and things that we have to overcome. The question is, can we help someone else out? Because just as others take wrong turns, we also take our wrong turns. And sometimes we get lost in the thicket of life struggles and the bad choices we may have made. And so we all need that siyata d'shmaya, the heavenly support on the road. And the best way for us to get help is to be there to help others. So my friends, as we aspire to get back onto our own roads, we pray for God's assistance so that we could find our path, that we could find our refuge safe and sound. Let's be there for others. Let's think about how we can help another person. I want to share with you a fascinating teaching from the Gemara. The Gemara says that when we are helping others, we ourselves are helped. Let me just put it up over here. Says the Gemara, Rav Chama bar Chanina pasach la pischa. Rav Chana bar Chanina introduced this portion with an introduction from the following verse in Tehillim. It says, Tov yasher Hashem al ken yorech haTorah b'derech. Good and upright is God, therefore he directs sinners along the way. Says Rab Chama, thank you so much, Michali. Says Rabbi Chama, if Hashem directs the sinners, then how much more so for the righteous? So what does this tell us? That when we are reaching out to help others in need, we assist another person, we support them, we help them, we see someone who's down and out, and we give them the support that they need, then we ourselves get that support, that help from above. When we go beyond our comfort zone, when we're able to help a person empathetically, is that the correct word? Empathically, maybe, then we'll merit ourselves to be in the right way as well. And so, my friends, that's the message and lesson that we could all take. If we reach out to others in need, then we ourselves are ensured with added support from above. God will help each one of us. So I could tell you it's a piece of advice that I've always found that works for me. When you uplift others, you yourself are uplifted too. Any questions, my friends, before we conclude today's shiur? Yasher koach, everyone. Please, God, we'll see you tomorrow. And looking forward to some more fascinating discussions with you.
It's just something simple. On our GPS, it says relocate. God has given us a chance to relocate.
100%, absolutely. And we have that opportunity all the time. That's the GPS telling us constantly to make that U-turn and to relocate and to find, so that no matter where you may roam, you can always come back home. Regardless of how lost the person might be, you're never too far gone.
Thank you, Rabbi.
No one is. Don't ever despair. Don't ever give up.
Rob, can you explain to me the meaning of Ein Od Milvado?
Oh,
Rosalind, you want to give your meaning of Enon Mavado?
Od Milvado is that there is only one person in this world responsible for everything, and it's HaKadosh Baruch Hu. We are under only one person in control. That's all.
Absolutely. And to tell you the truth, my brother signs all his documents in Od Milvado. He got that from a story of an old chassid who used to do the same. At the end of every calculation, at the end of every spreadsheet, no matter how complex our calculations might be, the bottom line is Ein Od Milvado. There's none but Hashem. So like the story I said yesterday, if it's part of the divine plan, the person should be somewhere. That's part of the plan. We're going to be there because that's what Hashem wanted, and that's what's going to be. So we just have to keep that in mind and realize it's all part of the divine plan. Ein Od Milvado. There's nothing but Hashem.
Thank you, Rob.
Yasher koach, everyone. Sei gesund. See you tomorrow, please, God. Stay healthy, stay well. Remember the past, live the present, trust the future. Remember, yesterday is history, tomorrow is a mystery. But today is a gift of Hashem, and that's why it's called the present.